discussion this morning. We just didn't have enough places to put council members as workers there. So that's what we discussed. This is one. Oh, a bunch of people. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Council Oversight Meeting of Thursday, August 8th, 2024. There's one item on the agenda. It's the presentation of emergency shelter statistics for the month of June and July 2024.
All right, thank you so much. So we didn't meet last month, so that's, I think, why we're looking at both June and July. There's nothing incredibly unique from previous months to report for June. We stayed full every night. We sheltered 42 women, 51 men. That's unique people. And 6 of those were veterans. You can see again, similarly to previous months, we have an older population trending kind of in the 50s and 60s age range. In June, we were able to house 2 people out of the shelter and send 3 back to the community of which they came or a place where they had family to go to. Those are, again, when I report those are specifically paid with food and shelter funds. So that doesn't mean that's the only people that were housed out of the shelter. Those are just the ones that we paid money for through one of our programs. We reported incident reports to you guys, and so 2 of those incidences that were on our logs were for police interventions, which is still for our kind of work. That's a very low number of behavioral problems. And then we were asked in the month of June, when we were here in June, to start specifically tracking turnaways. And you should have that report as well for the month of July. But we've been averaging about 10 people per night who present to shelter and the only reasons we've had turnaways thus far have been lack of capacity. And then if you move forward into July, you're gonna see real similar numbers, splits between genders, number of unique guests. Veterans is a little down, but that's not unusual. That's not indicative of anything specific. You'll see our housing numbers. We didn't have any behavioral interventions in the month of July. I've made a note on here just because the day I did this report, I happened to have some guests from City Care Shelter come down and tour our shelter. We collaborate quite a bit between our shelter and theirs. And they were just amazed that we don't have more police interventions than we do, because Ian, one of their shelter managers, said, I think we call the police every single day to our shelter for behavior problems. And our staff are just really adept at managing behavioral problems through their training. So that's about it. It's nothing super exciting over previous months we've talked about. So I'll just be happy to answer questions.
That's actually a good thing that it's not. The shift in age in population, is that due to something that you can see?
That's a trend nationwide in the homeless community, that we're seeing older people priced out of homes and priced out of their rentals are going up. And so it's a trend nationwide that the population is trending older.
I was going to speak to that too. I took a ride along with caravans, and there was a gentleman with the Air Force logo hat on that told me that Social Security was no longer covering the rise in rent for him. And I think last year maybe is when we got an update about rent assistance drying up. Mm-hmm. It's a lot cheaper to keep people with rent assistance housed than it is to deal with them when they become unhoused.
100%, yeah. And probably what he meant was that the amount of his Social Security was no longer enough to cover his rent, because it doesn't necessarily pay rent by itself. But we're seeing that happen a lot, where people are living on Social Security or some type of a retirement or pension, and it's just not enough money to cover the rising cost of rents and utilities, and then just cost of living in general.
And I would say I would guesstimate he was between 50 and 60 conservatively. Mm-hmm. So
it's interesting how that moves. Is it people who don't want to work is one allegation. Well, if they're in their 50s, they may not be able to. Or the opposite case, that the spouse dies or spouse gets sick or something,
Yeah.
you never know.
I would say there was a lady who I met this morning who had been in a car accident. She's probably, I would put in her late 40s, early 50s, who definitely is like one of those people that if they were to go back to work, they would need a kind of job that would give them accommodation so they weren't standing on a leg that had been shattered in a car accident previously. So,
Well, those are important things to do. Yes, sir.
Similarly, if I recall, in past years, I would notice that there would be considerably more men than women, 4 to 1, 5 to 1. And I notice we've talked about it for a while, but the number of women needing to stay at the shelter has increased a lot. And now it's in June, a difference of 9 between men and women, 51 to 42, and then 46 to 34 in July. So, I mean, continue to see more women. And is that just, issues of domestic violence, or are there other reasons you see for that trend in that population?
So we are, domestic violence is a primary reason women do find themselves homeless. The majority of the reasons people show up at a friend's house is because they lost their place to live, could not afford to find another place, and had nowhere else to go. So, there's a spectrum of the homeless population. There are people whose homelessness is situational. That's primarily who we're serving at a friend's house. Then there's the chronic homeless population, which are the ones, some of which we've known for a long, long time here in Norman, that a lot of people you see on the streets that I think people are most concerned about. So our shelter really, we're seeing mostly non-chronically homeless people. And yeah, definitely we're seeing at Food and Shelter and across all programs a rise in the number of women and senior citizens.
One of the questions I talked to you about a few weeks ago was what the turnover is. So when this version of the shelter opened in November 2022, I'd asked you are there any people staying there today that were staying there when it first opened? And is there anybody currently staying there that's been staying there the entire time? It's been
Nobody that stayed there the entire time.
Some people
So,
have maybe left and maybe come back.
yes, yeah, we have seen some of that, and those are people who've, been in and out of homelessness. They may have family they can go stay with for a little bit, and then that falls apart, or something like that. But nobody that's been there the entire time that I'm aware of. Like, I think I had mentioned to you, I was at the shelter right before you'd asked me that question, and it was a lot of new people. It was really predominantly new people.
Okay, so over the time that it's existed, this version, people are coming and staying there, but they're either being connected with housing or a service or that deals with addiction or mental health, or they have family that comes forward. But people they're finding a way out of having to stay at the shelter for long periods of time like that.
Yeah, most people who enter into homelessness find a resolution themselves. So a family member who says you can come stay with me, or they were in the workforce or can get in the workforce and they can get out fairly quickly using their own resources. So it's the shelter is providing that security that you need to kind of figure out what your plan's going to be. And for some people that can be quick. It's a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But for others, they need that longer period of time to get a Section 8 voucher or get some type of housing resource.
Okay. And then we've talked also about, it's not a stat on here, but the number of guests that have income, work, either they do have a job and they work, they just don't make enough, or they have Social Security or disability income, but can't either afford anywhere, or they've been evicted before and so nobody will rent to them, or they can't pay the deposits, whatever the reason may be. But the kind of percent of people staying there on average that do have income
Yeah.
or do work, but can't find any place to live.
Yeah, that number's on our June report, but not on our July report. In May, 30 of the 93 guests that stayed there reported having income, but reported it insufficient to sustain housing. Our HMIS data does not ask that question, so it is something we have to poll guests on specifically. But if you look in the accessory reports that you might get that are directly out of HMIS, it does report who comes in with income and what that income level is. It breaks it down into brackets. So for instance, for the month of July, 17, 24, 27 guests of the 93 reported having income, 51% reported having no income when they entered, so.
And then I guess when people do come into the shelter, they don't just walk in and find a spot and hang out. There is a check-in,
Mhm.
you know who the people are that are staying there.
Yes, yeah.
And you are able to connect people with the local services we have. That if they come there, it's not just here's the bed and we'll see you later. You've got people and resources in place to help those folks. Is that right?
Correct, yeah. So we do a full HMIS intake and entry, which ask a lot of questions like, do you have income? Do you receive SNAP benefits? Are you a veteran? Do you receive benefits if you are a veteran? We ask all of those questions, and then that guides us in what resources to connect them to. So our caseworkers at the shelter, when somebody's new to us, if they don't have an ID, we'll give them an ID voucher. If they don't have a birth certificate, we'll go online and send off for their birth certificate that we pay for, Food and Shelter pays for. So we do all of that kind of connection because you have to have those documents to apply for Section 8 housing or any kind of housing benefit. So that's really about housing preparedness. And then, of course, we make referrals, but different agencies like SSVF and the VA and Community Mental Health Center do outreach within the shelter and at all the day shelters. So we're consistently connecting them to resources.
And I know I ask you this at almost every meeting, but you do check for sex offenders.
Yes.
And our contract does not allow
Yeah, the
them
contract
to stay
is
there
specific,
anyway.
yeah. And we use the City of Norman's registry link to check for sex offenders.
And does that allow you do you know what they look like too? I don't know if it comes with a picture
There are
or-
photos for most of those people, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead, Len.
I was just gonna say, June was a while ago, but I have a faint memory of asking if you were keeping track of the.
Turnaways?
Mhm.
Yeah, you should have a report, maybe a partial for June and a full report. We have started using a Google document. So I know it's in here for July because I did see it when I was scanning through.
Where does it come up?
It is the very last document that you have in your packet.
It'd be like page 66.
66 and forward through 54. So you'll see that for the full month of July. It's separated by days and it shows, I've taken out names, but it breaks it up by gender and the reason that they've been turned away, age, gender, and the reason they've been turned away per day. And so
Most of it's max capacity.
we've not had to turn anybody away for other reasons so far since
Like
we've been
sex
tracking.
offender or
Yeah, not so far.
violent outburst or.
Not so far. I mean, this is what just, like I said, we've only been doing this since you requested it in June.
I really appreciate it. It's really revealing about how much of it is max capacity.
Well, and that's, were you done? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just scanning this. So I take it then no sex offenders have tried to stay at the shelter since you've been keeping track.
It's been twice and we've provided them alternative locations to go to.
Where might those, are they like?
Just a
big
motel
greens
stay
and-
until we could find another city for them to go to where they had shelter available.
Okay, so they are getting connected to a place if possible.
Yeah, there are shelters in Oklahoma City that will house sex offenders, so that we can get them up there if that's absolutely necessary, but.
Okay, Thank you.
And on that same thing, and just, this is a sense thing, do you sense that there are more sex offenders in the general population in Norman than there were, say, 6 months ago or 8 months ago?
In the homeless population
Yeah.
or the general population as a whole?
The homeless population.
Oh, I don't believe so. I don't think that that's ever been something that we've known. It just is a wide range.
I'm sure you don't
Yeah.
wear
Yeah. We usually, because we're working on housing plans for almost everybody that we encounter, that we're working with, that's only been a handful of times I can think of that somebody has come up as they're a sex offender and we've been unable to house them because there's no green zone, I don't know what you call them.
Yeah, agreed.
There's no place in Norman where that is legal to house somebody who's a sex offender, so we've had to look at alternative cities. And I've been at Food and Shelter 15 years. It just doesn't come up as often as you think it does.
Well, that's public perception.
It is.
Says that it is, and then of course, I don't do Facebook, but I get Facebook things in, and, the world's gone wild.
Yeah.
And
If
so.
you-
It's
If you're a
always-
weirdo like me and you pay attention to this stuff, I look at the jail log a lot. This is a weird thing to say out loud, but it's I'm always kind of looking where are our friends at when I haven't seen somebody for a while. And you go through there and you see people arrested for these things, but they're never from the homeless community. I mean, they're house people. People who are housed hurt people just like other people do.
Well, the other seems to be I'm sorry, Scott, you were. The other narrative seems to be that these people aren't from here. And what's your sense, you don't ask for an original address or an address that's 6 months old or something?
We ask where they lived when they became homeless.
Got
That's, we ask that on our point in time count every January, and then we do ask it on our intake. And we're still seeing about 85% say Norman, Noble, like this area. There has always been, since I've been working in this field, a transient nature between Oklahoma City and Norman or Dallas, Oklahoma City, that kind of thing that always exists, but it's still very dominantly Norman people.
Well, and that's that book that Heidi gave us,
It's a homelessness is a housing problem.
Homelessness is a Housing Problem, has, in chapter 4 of that, which you said to read first, has an explanation for that. It just doesn't seem that way. And so it works out well. I think one of the things in talking about, there's been all kinds of conversation about moving y'all and doing all those kinds of things. And now, those are the questions that come up most that I get on the doorstep.
Sure.
Is people saying, we do have more sex offenders. We do have, these people aren't from here. I don't know how you get around that. It's just an answer. It's an A or B thing. It either is or it isn't.
Yeah, the information does not tell us that.
Yeah.
I mean, that we collect and most people do have IDs when they come to us. If they don't, we help them get one. You can't get an ID that's not your face on it. So, I mean, when they get one, we see it. So people aren't lying to us about who they are. They are, they know that to get housing, they have to give their true information, and people want housing. So I think, I think there's a lot of fear associated with the what ifs and the unknowns, and I think a lot of that comes from there. But there's just no information, particularly reports to police or crimes reported to the police department that say the homeless community is any more violent than anybody else.
No, and there's another subset of the population that I would say is more violent than the normal population, but they're not the people staying at your place.
Correct. Yeah,
And
that's a
they're-
small group of people within the homeless community, just like it's a small group of people within the house community. I had this conversation with the leadership of the police department sometime last year, and their inference was people are getting more violent just in general, not just in the homeless community, but also housed people. There's just a lot more violence out there, and so I think that's just a trend people are seeing.
I don't know, I'm getting mellower as I'm getting older.
I'm getting tireder, so yeah, I don't have energy for violence.
But they're interesting questions in that and doing stuff. And I guess a question that I've got, I know you try and keep those guys off the sidewalk and everything else, but as I come in and out of here all day, they're there all day. And so there was an interesting thing in that book, that chapter 4 of that book, that said that Giuliani, the way he was successful in bringing the homeless out was to hide them. I'd like to hide them more. It just, the less times people have something there, we've had discussions with people about day shelters. We've had discussions about sobering centers. We've had all kinds of other things. I think that we haven't come to a solution yet because of the cost.
Yeah.
And it's just taking on somebody else, the responsibility for somebody else's life is expensive.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that's gonna end up.
My perception about, I'll just respond to that real quick and then we can turn over to Councilmember Dixon. My perception about that would be if the night shelter and the day shelter were closer together, it would look more hidden. It would, because there would be less need to get to the night shelter earlier, they're all right there together. The concerns about that, I heard from some of the neighboring services, like community services building, that, the people that will stay at the night shelter are already there in the daytime. They're at the hub, they're at Community Mental Health Center, they're at Food and Shelter, they're already there in the daytime. So I don't believe that presence will be any higher if we were to secure that place or, find another place on Griffin campus if that land were to come available for a permanent location. But I do think if you can keep services together where we have a day shelter, we have 3 day shelters in Norman that all work very well right now. If we can get the shelter closer to them, it won't be, it certainly won't be down here. It won't solve the 100% of the downtown problem, but it'll solve a lot of it.
I think there's some logic to it. Did you have something, Scott?
Yes, sir. I was gonna ask, do we know of the people that get bus tickets home, wherever home is, do we know if any or how many end up back in the shelter at a later point in time?
Well, we don't track that, but I can tell you, I haven't seen any of them. At least at the place where I work, I don't work at the night shelter very often, but at the day shelter, usually we don't see them return back to Norman.
Good. Do you know what the longest any one continuous stay is?
I don't off the top of my head, but I can find that out. That's easy to pull out of HMIS. It's not going to be on any of these reports because that's not what they report, but.
Sure. Do you know what the average stay is?
I don't know what the average stay is. I mean, because we do have people that stay 3 or 4 or 5 months, and then we have them that stay 3 days. So an average isn't really going to tell us a story. But let me do some research on that and I can report back to you.
And then those that are, dealing with kind of substance abuse issues, are they required to obtain any kind of treatment while staying at a friend's house?
Well, our specific contract right now is for a low barrier shelter that does not allow us to do stuff like that. Okay. But when they start moving into housing programs, there are some conditions associated with housing programs. But again, looking at our behavioral reports, that's an issue in the homeless community. It's not really an issue at a friend's house because of the way the shelter structure works. We're able to screen out a lot of those people. They don't do well with the kind of accountability we require.
Gotcha. I noticed it said there were no issue or police issues in July, but the police kind of incident report that they put out had 5 at that address. There was a alarm/holdup on the 1st, fraud on the 2nd, disturbance/domestic on the 9th, and animal killing on the 10th, and trespassing on the 31st.
Those are probably guest calls, if I had to guess. What I'm reporting and what our staff report is when we've had to call.
Okay.
So it could be that guests have called and reported something was stolen or reported somebody was harassing them or something. I'm not sure. We don't often get that information.
And then I noticed on June 24th, since Caleb/security told me, blah, blah, it was the radio, I think, running around with it. Is Caleb the security, is he CLEAT certified?
Caleb is a shelter advocate. He's not a CLEAT person.
Okay. So any security training?
Yeah, he was in the military and he has, a history of that.
Okay, but any private security, since being in the military training?
No.
Okay.
other than the training we've provided. We provide verbal de-escalation training, crisis intervention, mental health crisis intervention. We provide all of that training to everybody that works with us.
Gotcha. And Councilman Holman, I noticed, I looked at the kind of numbers for July, the turnaways. You're talking about kind of the stays or evening out. There were 198 men turned away and 55 women in July is what the report when I added it up.
That may not be unique people. It could be the same people several times. So I took the names out just to protect it because this becomes a public record. It could be a lot of the same people. They present night after night after night.
Can you track them by like their HMIS number and provide that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that anonymous enough to?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it for me. Sorry about that.
I was just kind of curious what the outlook on housing is, because I feel a lot of these people are kind of stuck in a loop waiting for Section 8 availability. But I know Section 8 is just a part of the answer because permanent supportive housing is. Also, does Norman have really workforce housing? I don't know. But do you see like a trend towards more Section 8 or permanent supportive housing coming online?
I certainly don't know about Section 8 if that's all kind of a private development. I will tell you that we were told at our continuum of care meeting that they are not issuing Section 8 vouchers for the remainder of this year.
Oh.
So it will be into 2025 before they issue any new vouchers.
So
and that's
somebody
right.
coming in this summer and fall, winter will have to wait roughly 6 months.
Probably longer because the people that apply today are going to be at higher on that list than somebody that comes in October or November. And so the wait's going to start just getting longer and longer. So that's a challenge for sure. And it's one of the reasons we want to really push back on put a mandatory length of stay, because for those folks who that's going to be the only way that they're able to sustain housing because they are on disability income or Social Security. They're going to have a safe place to stay until that comes available. I will say we've been looking at policies from all kinds of places. I may have sent some of them to you all. One of the policies that's recommended for low barrier shelters is that people are only allowed to stay if they are engaging in a housing plan. So they've applied, worked on getting their documents, they've applied for Section 8 housing and they're on the wait list and they're kind of taking those steps. And so that's definitely something we've been looking at implementing, is making sure that we're getting people into that process and plan and that we're not saving beds for people that are not interested in taking those steps. Of course, I've never met anybody that didn't want to get housing ever, but sometimes it's riddled with obstacles.
And then there's all this talk about hotel vouchers and whatnot, but in general, the funding for that, where is that? I know it like comes and goes.
Yeah, the only funding that comes into our community that allows for motel vouchers is what's called EFSP money, Emergency Food and Shelter Program money. It's federal dollars that's facilitated through United Way Worldwide. It's facilitated through our local United Way, and it's a pittance of money. It's like $10,000 a year for motel stays. And our rate at the motels that we are able to use is roughly about $300. It's almost $400 a month, $380 something a week for shelter for one room. So it's a very expensive way to do shelter.
Okay. Are people able to cycle into the housing options in OKC or elsewhere as a way to not have to wait months on end?
Oklahoma City announced before Norman announced that they're not doing vouchers any longer for some time, indefinitely. So I don't think that that's an option either. I don't know where Oklahoma Housing Finance Authority is, because anybody in the state of Oklahoma can apply anywhere. I don't know how each individual housing authority prioritizes, but Oklahoma Housing Finance Authority is a statewide entity, and you can apply for that as well. So we are trying to encourage people to not just wait on a Section 8 voucher, to look at other options. But when your income is $1,000 a month and rent is $800 a month, and that's gonna be really a challenge to find a place that works. So, permanent supportive housing is an option. We do have permanent supportive housing through our continuum of care grants, through at Food and Shelter, at Thunderbird Clubhouse, Hope Community Services, and Community Mental Health Center. Those are, we choose who goes onto those grants off of our by name list. It's required that they be chronically homeless, so they have to have a diagnosis of some kind and also be homeless a certain length of time. And so that's how we choose those. We at Food and Shelter are interested in either acquiring housing for permanent supportive housing or building housing for permanent supportive housing. That's kind of been on our radar for the last year or so. We've been kind of similarly to everything, holding out on that Griffin land, hoping something comes available. But we have also been looking at just acquiring existing housing to use. Just before this meeting started, we had an informal conversation just about housing, and one of the things that people are doing, communities are having to get creative because this is becoming a more complicated problem as the day goes by. And shared housing is a new trend where you rent an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment, and house 3 or 4 people there, which isn't necessarily allowed in Norman yet. But shared housing is a trend that communities are seeing as a way to do permanent supportive housing.
That's all the questions I have on that. Thank you.
I think a lot of the things that are confusing the issues between your communications and the Facebook communications, that we can actually hone down on are accountability pieces. That's a big word, and how do you parse it out and do what you do. I think what people are looking for, the questions that are being asked here, is who are these people? Where are they going? What are you doing to fix them? Are you doing that out of the shelter? Are you doing it out of Food for Friends? Are you, all those kind of questions, and the length of stay. It would be easier, frankly, not to do the HMIS numbers, but to do more of your Google numbers on this other side. But I understand that that's double key work, and because there are a lot of questions that most of us don't care about that come up in HMIS. That they're important to the people that read that stuff.
Yeah.
But to us, they're not. I would think that it would be an interesting endeavor for us to have Larry comes in, he checks in, he's been there for 3 days, he's done this, this, and this, he doesn't need a driver's license, those kinds of things. Where is he going from here? And to know that he went to get sober, okay? He gets a line. And if people had it, can't be by name, I agree. But HMIS number, any number that we can differentiate between people that went in. We've had some conversations with some people that could develop another software, but the problem is 2 softwares is double work, and that's dumber than a hammer. Most nonprofits that I know don't have extra people, so it's hard to be able to do that. And I'd like to work towards that as a solution, something that we can more easily put out that's not 60 page or 30 pages per month. That's maybe a 2-page thing. It's just the boiled down version of what we're doing. How many people do we have? I notice a lot in here that I had understood that the capacity for the shelter is 43, 45?
52.
It is 52?
It started at 40, and then the fire marshal, was that who reevaluated, because we started using some spaces that weren't originally going to be sleeping spaces and added some beds in there. So it's officially 52 now.
Okay, well, and that solves that question, because they're saying we are overpopulating and you're going against
Yeah, that was changed. I don't exactly remember when that was, but it was formally changed.
As long as it's a legal amount, it's irrelevant. But it's interesting. It's all communication between what people are seeing, and people are run by fear, and people are run by prejudice, and people are run by all kinds of things that aren't good feelings. Mm-hmm. And so, it'll be interesting in this next year to see how we can improve that communication process and figure out the system. Anyway, yes, sir.
One of the things the mayor touched on too was, even if they're not doing anything, when they line up on the sidewalk on Gray, and then just that sight seems to bring something out of people. It makes them either feel angry about it or fearful about it or what's going on in there about it. And it's been a struggle since the beginning to address that, but a way for the guests to know that, I don't know, if we can not have them block the sidewalk, that would be
Yeah,
nice.
we've really been flexing our boundaries real strong lately about the sidewalk. When I drove over here, I've been over here 3 times today. There were not people on the sidewalk one time I come by, but there were people on the east side of the building,
sure.
yeah, and
East
then on
side's
the
fine.
north side of the building. But so we've been really, really
They don't
flexing
need to
about,
line up anymore.
They don't have to line
There's no
up.
reason for them to be waiting in line, or I've gotta be first, like,
people that don't have a bed already do have to
Mhm.
be first, because if a bed comes available, first come, first serve. So there is some urgency about it that I think impacts people, but I drove over here, there are 3 men in wheelchairs, one with a walker, 2 wheelchairs sitting out there who just don't have the energy to go back and forth, and so sitting in the shade somewhere feels easier to them. And I understand the optics of it. I hear the same things that you guys hear. But we've really been flexing our boundaries strong about the sidewalk lately, and I'm hoping that gets better. I'll reiterate that to staff as well.
Yes, ma'am.
I was gonna say originally, I don't even remember what month it was, but we had discussed like setting up the back, I know there are tables back there, but creating a space that would be more inviting to hang out in. And then I just wanted to touch upon, I get that people feel a way when they see homeless people, but homeless people have a constitutional right, just the same as anyone else, to be where they're gonna wander. And not all of them are and even I would say our transient visitors who are released from institutions. One would hope that they would get connected with sources so that they're not at risk to themselves and others. But I mean, that is the reality of some broken systems, and being angry at the people suffering from the systems is not the solution.
It is really hard to look at people in the face and say people don't want to see you. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
I've worn uniforms in countries that.
I know.
So I feel the pain in that. I'm sorry,
Oh, that was all I had to add to that particular point.
Well, because we've been kind of like, are we maybe gonna move and maybe gonna move, I haven't really followed up a whole lot on putting something up out back. We have been offered
Like an event tent or something, or awning?
It's like a park awning, what you would see like at First Baptist Church, it's blue, like what they have at their church, to put back there to at least provide some shade, so it's better to be on that side of the building. It doesn't have to be it's not a permanent structure, it would just go temporarily, it would have to be weighted down, but that's something I'll visit with Daryl, or I think I saw Shannon in here, about, to see if that's something we can put there just temporarily and at least direct people to the north side of the building.
breaking the sun helps.
It does help.
Anything that you can get in the shade.
Yeah, it would be way more inviting than the east side of the building.
And that would solve my problem. It just. Anything else from everybody? All right, well, I guess we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me get these back to you because I'll steal them. Why do I have?
I can print them again unless you don't want them.
No,
If you do,
I
you can
collect
have
up plenty of paper. On that,
Oh, yeah, who was present for this one?
these two and me. And so as we sit down, what I'm trying to figure out is I don't think that we need to move over there and spend $200,000. We can spend the $200,000 other ways. I tried to figure out a way to be able to do that. So we had a conversation to see if that logic even worked. Could we sit down there and work with vouchers? Now that I find out it's $380 a week, no voucher, or $400 a week.
assuming that prices don't fluctuate with, the market.
Demand, and so, okay, so at 400 a week, if I was saying